Good morning, church. Let me echo what Stephen said. I love Senior Sunday, and it's such a great day to celebrate with all the families and seniors for such a great accomplishment. And in fact, I'm starting a new series today in many ways, which will go right alongside what we're doing today. You can view this as an appendix series to our school year theme, Follow Me. It's called Grow, and it's really based on a really simple idea that following Jesus doesn't look exactly the same at every stage of life. So, for example, that word senior, it means 12th grade of high school, but it also, the exact same word means people age 65 and up. Now, following Jesus, thank you for that amen there. Following Jesus doesn't look exactly the same in those two stages of life. So, for example, let's just say that an 18-year-old goes to bed tonight, and by some source of crazy magic, they wake up in the morning and they're 70. Like, can you imagine what that would feel like? Like, it'd be so overwhelming to wake up and feel the weight of the world that sometimes a 70-year-old feels, and to experience the complexities of life and physically and mentally and what that would feel like. I mean, honestly, if an 18-year-old went to bed and woke up 70, they'd probably have a nervous breakdown. But if a 70-year-old went to bed at night and woke up an 18-year-old, they would also have a nervous breakdown for a whole different set of reasons. It's different following Jesus depending on your stage of life. Here's an example from the sports world. The most recognizable basketball player on earth is LeBron James. He's 39 years old. His son Bronny's 19 years old. And most likely both of them will be playing in the NBA this fall. How does each relate to the game of basketball? Pretty differently. Bronny's 19, so he's out to prove himself. He's working as hard as ever. There's a raw energy and passion to his game because he's just trying to get there. He's trying to figure it all out. But LeBron's been playing over 20 seasons. He's accomplished just as much as anybody can in the game of basketball, and so he thinks about the game differently. It's more about, what can I give back to this game? What is my legacy going to be in the game of basketball? Two different people playing the same game, but they're playing it very differently. So as Christians, as disciples of Jesus, we can only follow Jesus where we are in life. And sometimes that looks differently depending on your season. In fact, in the Bible, there's quite a few passages which talk about the stages of life. So, for example, let me start in 1 John chapter 2, where John says in verse 12, I'm writing to you, dear children, because your sins have been forgiven on account of his name. I'm writing to you, fathers, because you know him who's from the beginning, and I'm writing to you, young men, because you have overcome the evil one. So notice there's three different stages of life. You've got the innocence and the dependence of children, and then you've got the strength and the capability of a young man, and then you've got the wisdom and the experience of a father, simply representing those older people in life. So author John is writing to these people saying, yeah, it looks a little different. And notice he gives each group something different. There's a different descriptor for that group. Second part of the Bible, look at this. This is a really interesting line. So this is at the end of the Gospel of John. Jesus is having a conversation with Peter, and he says something pretty interesting. He says, Peter, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said, follow me. So notice a few things about this text. On the one hand, this is just words Jesus says to Peter. End of his life, Jesus is telling Peter, hey, you're going to die kind of like I died. On a different level, you can read this as two paradigms of life. Jesus references old and he references young, and he has different things to say about those stages of life. When you're younger, what do? You go where you want to go. In other words, you can almost think of the first half of life as an active half, where you have agency, you have energy, you make decisions, you decide what you're going to do, where you're going to go. But the second half of life, Jesus says, things will be done to you. So the first half of life is marked by activity. The second half of life is marked by passivity. It's more and more about things that happen to you that you didn't want or that you cannot control. And so oftentimes the second half of life is where we learn how to let go. It's where we learn how to accept, because many of these things we didn't want to happen. So you can think about this as two stages of life. And still, one final example from Scripture would be the famous parable of the prodigal son, or the two sons. The first son, in many ways, represents the passions and the energies of the first half of life. We want to leave home. We want to get away. We want to make our mark in the world. We want to soak everything up the world has to offer. That's the younger brother. But the older brother represents the second half of life, which is marked by responsibility. We feel weighed down by the day-to-day grind of life. Many of us feel like we've been doing the right thing for many, many years, but it maybe doesn't work out the way that you wanted it to. You work hard, you get a home, you try to pay your mortgage, you take care of the yard, you raise your kids, you take care of your parents, and in the second half of life, rather than life becoming more glamorous and more exciting, we often find ourselves full of disappointment, sometimes boredom, sometimes bitterness, sometimes envy at others who seemingly are getting more than we are. That's the older brother, second half of life. 2 years ago, I read a book called Sacred Fire by Ronald Rolheiser, and he summarizes these two halves of life by saying the first half of life is getting your life together, and the second half of life is giving your life away. And we have to learn how to do that. And so over the next few weeks, I'm going to explore what these various stages of discipleship really look like and how you grow within each one. So today I want to take a brief look at this first half of life. The first decade of existence for most people, barring some traumatic home situation or some kind of abuse, is good. Most people in the first decade of life are generally happy. Think about it. You're taken home from the hospital by family, and for 10 years, you are fed and clothed and coddled and nurtured by these amazing grown-ups who take care of every single need that you have. And then something happens, and sometimes it's in the course of one summer. It's called the gift of puberty. And despite the voice changes and the body changes and the general awkwardness of this period of life, it actually is a gift. Rolheiser puts it succinctly: puberty is designed by God to drive us out of our homes. It's at this point of life where we enter this first part of discipleship, which is getting our lives together. And we're fueled by this raw energy to go and tackle the world. We want to be with friends all the time. We want to experience new things all the time. Like if you consider yourself in this season of life right now, let's just pick if you're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, if your friend calls you tonight at 1 in the morning and says, "Hey, you want to go do something?" What are you going to say? "Yeah, where? Tell me where and when. Let's go. Let's do this." If you're 60 years old and your friend calls you at 1 in the morning and says, "Hey, do you want to go do something?" What are you going to say to them? You're going to say, unless you mean getting up and going to the bathroom, no, I'm not going to do anything with you at 1 in the morning. And yet it's the same person. 18 versus 60, something changed. This is the tale of two halves of life. The first half of life is awesome. The second half of life is awesome. They're just different. The first half is marked by this incredible quest to go figure out who you are. You're trying to figure out, what school am I going to go to? I'm going to decide on a career. I'm going to find a mate, maybe. I'm going to start a family, maybe. I want to become financially secure. I want to belong somewhere. This is all first half of life stuff. In fact, most modern day music is written about the first half of life, figuring all these things out. And it's driven by this relentless energy. There's so much raw energy inside of us in the first half of life. It's like a fire, and it pushes us to love and to taste and to experience and to be everywhere and to do everything. This is why young people are so fun to be around. In fact, just a few weeks ago, my daughter and her friends finished their middle school musical, and after the final performance, they all went to Andy's Frozen Custard. There were 50 of them. And I guess they stood in the parking lot till midnight singing the songs from their musical at the top of their lungs. Well, that's a great picture of the first half of life. It's full of energy and it's full of passion. You can see this in Luke 15. Again, younger brother. The younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything. Now, I know we tend to think about this as negative, but if you just look at the verbs here, this is descriptive. This is what people do in the first half of life. We set off. Let's go. Carpe diem. That word squander, it's actually an agricultural word, which just means you throw up the grain and let the wind blow it wherever it should go. So it's this sense of, we're going out into the world. We're going to make our mark in the world. We're going to spend everything. There's an energy there. There's a passion for life. In the first half of life, we crave meaning and belonging and knowledge. We want to make a difference. We want to learn everything we can. We want to love everyone we can. And again, there is so much energy that in the first half of life, it's hard to contain our energy. Now, as a preview for next week in the second half of life, it's actually hard to maintain our energy. But in the first half, it's just there. And so for those of you in this stage of life, like our seniors in high school, what should we watch out for? Like, what are the temptations of the first half of life? Well, looking at the prodigal son story, after he spends everything, what does he do next? He feeds the what? He feeds the pigs. And that little scene in his story represents stagnation. He's unwilling to grow up. So the temptation of the first half of life is to stagnate. It's to fall in love so much with youth that you never want to grow up. In fact, 1 Corinthians 3, Paul puts it this way: I gave you milk, not solid food, because you weren't ready for it. Indeed, you're still not ready for it. So the principle here is that some people get so attached to their stage of life that they refuse to grow out of it. So if you see a parent in the room take their infant who's crying out the doors, you don't think anything of it. However, if I were to sling my 14-year-old daughter Anna over my shoulders and walk her out of the room, you would think that was really weird. Because 14-year-olds aren't supposed to throw tantrums. They're supposed to grow out of that life stage. You see, there is a time where we should let these deep, raw, inner passions of youth drive us, and they're gifts from God. They're really good things. But there's also a time in life where we grow up in faith. We move to a different form of maturity or spirituality, or in the language of the prodigal son, there is a time when we come to our senses. And so the temptation of the first half of life is to stagnate. it's to perpetually chase the next experience of euphoria. In fact, here's what this temptation looks like specifically. So Rolheiser suggests that our culture today has given us two false images of what the mature man and what the mature woman are. Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. So I'm going to read a quote from his book. It's a little longer than what I normally read, but I think he's really put his finger on a problem with our culture today. So here's what Rolheiser says. The ideal of adulthood is the eternal boy, forever youthful and swinging free and non-committed through the skies. And the eternal girl, forever free of body fat and stretch marks, perpetually turning heads as she walks into the room. So he's saying our culture today, that's what it's presenting as the ideal. He goes on to say there are many pressures inside of our culture today that want to keep us forever young. So often boys remain boys, not men, and girls remain girls, not women. This is the not-so-subtle ethos of most secularized cultures, promoted and reinforced by the fashion industry and Hollywood, where leading stars are growing ever younger and ever slimmer. And that leaves us with a problem. Peter Pan and Tinkerbell are in the end children who never carry out any responsibilities or carry anyone or anything beyond their own youthful bodies. Mature adults carry the young, and they also carry all the responsibilities that make our families and communities and neighborhoods and churches and governments work. It is the wisdom of God and nature that eventually makes for gray hair, body fat, and stretch marks, all of which are a struggle for many of our youth today. Isn't that a profound quote? I mean, most of us, we spend our lives pushing against those stretch marks and that body fat. We're chasing something. What are we doing? Especially I'm talking now to you, those of you who are in your 40s, 50s, 60s, but still chasing the 18-year-old life. Like, what are you doing and why are you doing that? Well, you've been presented this narrative of culture which says you will only be happy if you can perpetuate this eternal youth. But the reality is, as he's saying in this quote, Peter Pan and Tinkerbell are still, they're kids. They don't grow up. And so there does have to become a point in our life where we realize, oh, my next step in maturity is I have to carry something. I have to carry somebody else, and we don't need to shy away from that. So the temptation of the first half of life is to stagnate, is to become so infatuated with the next experience of euphoria that we don't grow up. And so how do we mitigate against that temptation? Well, look at back in Luke 15. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And so he got up and he went to his father." So the move towards maturity, at least in this text, is marked by two features. Number one is this: he actually made a commitment. So notice these two phrases from this paragraph. I will set out, and so he got up. Which of those statements do you think is the more significant one when it comes to maturity? It's the second. Anybody can say, I will set out. But it takes a mature person to actually follow through and get up and do it. So many people in the first half of life are really good at the first phrase. I will. I will get the paper turned in. I will clean my room. I will apply for that job. But those are just words. If you want to move forward past this temptation into maturity, it begins with commitment. In other words, very simply, if you text your friend saying you'll be somewhere, be there. If you tell your parents you're going to do something, do it. If you make a promise to God, keep it. Commitment is the marker of maturity between this first and second half of life. But secondly, notice in the story, the prodigal son rejoins a community. So he starts out at home, he journeys away, he rebels, thinking there will be a better world out there, but what he finds is isolation. The love that he found in the party scene is not quite as deep as the love he found in his own living room with his father. The wild weekends were exciting for a time, but in the end left him alone. These people didn't really care about him. They objectified him. And so what he does is he rejoins the community. So a word to our graduating seniors. Some of you you're ready to get out, and that's fine. You should be ready to get out. Maybe you've got a conflict at home and you're just ready to get out on your own. That's a really good thing. You should be driven to go do your own thing. And I would say enjoy the passion and the energy of this phase of life. Go love the world for all that it is. And in fact, the rest of the church, we need this. The rest of the church needs the passion and energy of people in the first half of life. These will be some of the most exciting years of your life, but they won't be the best years of your life. The best years of your life are going to be marked by a generosity for the complexity of life. They're going to be marked by a wisdom that comes from experience. And so if you want to start laying the foundation for the kind of life that you can see in a really good grandparent, or you can see in just a really good senior 65-plus Christian here at this church who does seem to carry themselves with this serenity of life, if you want to start in that direction, you lay the foundation through commitment and through community. And you can practice those now, even if you're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. In fact, this is the move we see in the life of Jesus. The only story we have from Jesus in the first half of life, excluding the nativity story, is this scene where he's 12. And what does he do? He stays at the temple because he wants to learn. And even though he probably knows this is going to irritate his parents, he leaves the parents, at least temporarily, because he's so passionate about soaking up every experience he has that the world has to offer him. So he wants to go to the temple. He wants to learn. He wants to gain in knowledge. He wants to spend time with these teachers. That's what we do in the first half of life. But then when the parents go find Jesus, the text says that from that point on, he is obedient to them. And then at the end of Luke 2, it says he grew. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And so these stages of life, they're all important. And we all go through the first half, and it's good. It's really, really good. But as we mature, we move to this second half, which is marked by commitment. And this is what Jesus does. If Jesus doesn't grow in wisdom and in stature and favor with God and man, he can never go to the cross. A mature person would never do that. Or an immature person would never go to the cross, but Jesus does. He bridges the chasm to save us because he grows. And so we're about to sing about the Jesus who does this, living hope. And as we sing this song, I do want you to think about Jesus who does mature. I want you to think about your own stage of life. You might ask the Lord where he's prodding you to go in the big picture of your season of life. And as we sing, if you want to pray with someone, our shepherds are going to be in the back two atriums. You're welcome to go pray with our shepherds. If you would like to get baptized, I'll be down here in the front to receive any of those who would want to make that call on their life today. If you'll stand and sing.